I think as a 16-year-old looking at where I am now, I would say, firstly, I don't think I would ever have imagined I would be doing what I'm doing today. I would have thought it was maybe just get a good job, have a good income, raise a family, not have to worry about things as much. My dad worked, very hard his whole life, doing taxis to get extra money or doing lots of overtime. And my mum was at home, so she took care of us and had to put up with the behaviour of 5 kids growing up. But also through that, you get a desire to go your parents are working really hard for you, and they want to create that environment where their kids have that opportunity to do better, and do things they enjoy. And I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the International Private Bank in JP Morgan. I love people. I love leading people. Be careful you think more about the other people that you're working with, and think about the impact that you have on them and how you do things, not just the what.
Imagine if 80-year-old Mark was listening to this conversation in a couple of decades. What would you want him to hear?
Yeah, I think I would just...
This week on Stories That Shape Us, we are joined by an amazing guest, Mark Napier. He's a Chief Technology Officer at JP Morgan, but he also leads the Glasgow technology site of JP Morgan, over 2,600 employees. Mark is the kind of leader who is just as passionate about people as he is about technology. In this episode, Mark talks about growing up as the eldest of 5 in a working class family, about being the first to go to university in his family, and he talks about what it's really like to lead through a global pandemic. We talk about everything from staying grounded in building meaningful connections in a world of social media, to why creating space for others to rise and thrive matters. So whether you're leading a team, you're chasing your goals, or figuring out what success looks like for you, Mark's story will speak to you. See you in the episode. Mark, when I was preparing for this episode, I went on social media, I went on Google search, tried to get a sense of who Mark was. But for some reason, I didn't find any social media accounts. Why is that? Have you always been not super interested in social media stuff?
Yeah, I would say I'd never really get into social media in terms of connecting with people. I've got a set of friends that I've been friends with for a long time, and we maybe are of a generation that didn't really actively grow up with social media. Okay. So that's probably the reason why I'm not there. And then I think sometimes you don't want to clash with your kids on social media, so that's another aspect. And then look, I think it can take up a lot of time, and sometimes I don't have that amount of time, where if I get drawn into something, I'll spend a lot of time on it. So Gotcha. Maybe not being so active in social media helps me manage my time a little bit better.
One of the fun facts I found about you was it was World Cup 1998 in France.
Oh, wow.
Do you know where I'm going to with this?
Yeah, maybe. I'm surprised you found that, but...
And you're out in the open with people from various nationalities, and you start a dance.
Yes.
What was going on?
So, yeah, I suppose that's... So we all graduated. Most of my friends I met at university. My kind of lifelong friends are most from university, but I was at university at 16, so I was quite young. We graduated in '94. I worked for a family business for a couple of years. Some of them ended up down in London. I ended up down in London with JP Morgan in '97, and the World Cup was '98. Little did we know it would be the last major championships that Scotland qualified for a long time. And we all decided we were going to go to France '98. Hired a minibus. There was between 16 and 20 of us at various points in time. I was out there for 2 weeks, and we spent the time driving around France and experiencing different World Cup games, but experiencing different cultures and the different fans in the different cities that we went to. And, Bordeaux, will long live in the memory. We had some great times in Bordeaux, but we were in the Bordeaux Square. Every country at the World Cup had a tent. Their fans were in the tents, and then eventually started mixing and matching. I think we ended up next to the Brazil tent, and I think I kind of said I think I could start a conga. And my friend said, no, there's no way you could start a conga. And I was like, yeah, I think I can start a conga. And I'm like, let's all do the conga. And then everyone joined.
Interesting.
Everyone, every nationality.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all of these football fans were doing a conga around Bordeaux Square. So that will long live in the memory. There are some other memories of kilts and nightclubs and such like, but that will last long in the memory. Yeah.
So I found this from looking at your University of Strathclyde alumni interview.
Yes,
that was where you mentioned that. Well, Mark, you're a senior leader in JP Morgan. You lead the Glasgow sites. You a technologist through and through. But I was quite keen to know, who is Mark? So aside all the career roles, technical terms, if I could just ask you, like, who is Mark and what makes him tick? What will be your response to that?
So, I mean, I think I've always been a person who had a thirst for knowledge. And so I've always wanted to learn and I've always wanted to grow. And so I think the thing that I think, who am I? I'm someone who can get quite detailed and really interested in things. And when I get really interested in them, I spend a lot of time in them, so I can kind of lose myself in some of those things. So whether that's a topic and reading books and watching videos, or whether that's trying to take up golf and building a hitting net simulator in the garage because I'm so intense about it. It has its downsides, but I think that thirst for knowledge and growth and learning and understanding things has always been part of who I am. Outside of that, I have a family. I have two, not fully grown up boys that are now 15 and 19, and that my wife, who I met here. So, I am obviously a father and a husband, a partner, and looking after their children as they grow up and trying to keep them on the straight and narrow, and hopefully give them the opportunity to do what they enjoy doing, right? Sometimes not everyone has the opportunity to do things that they just enjoy, right? Many of us have to do things that, you need to do because that's how you can move forward. Maybe that's how you can survive. Maybe that's how you just get your foot on the ladder. But you can create an environment maybe where the people that come behind you can get to do some things that they enjoy first and foremost, because if you can get that out of your life, then that's brilliant. So I think that's part of who I am, trying to create that environment for them to have that. And just enjoying our life, whether that's cooking pizza, having dinner, trying to teach people golf, or going to the movies, or going on holiday. That's the kind of things I think that are who I am. And, I love people. I love leading people. Yeah. And I've kind of done a lot of that. Yep. I get a kick out of it, clearly, as you can imagine. So I think that's a part of me, and that's a part of me that I'm very competitive as well.
Are you?
Yes.
In games and life, or both?
Yes. Games, life, sport. I've got a lot of friends, obviously, that, keep coming back to golf, but I've got friends who've played golf for years. I was never a golfer.
Right.
But now I'm in golf, and I'm in competitions because I want to play, and they're like, why are we don't do that? So yes, I like that competitive edge. I've had it in various different things as I've grown up, whether that was academic, to get to university, whether that was looking at the people I'd arrived at university with, who, very, very smart people, and thinking, how do you compete there? Whether that was, I was a bowler, my dad was a bowler, I took up bowling at 12. And I was super competitive at that. I played for the county at junior level, played for the club teams when I was a teenager, and skipped, the person that comes last in the bowling team is referred to as the skip, but they tend to be the leader, and I was that at a very young age with generally older people than me. Okay. So that kind of enjoyment of leadership, the pressure, the competition, You can't always win, but you can do your damnedest to try. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm very competitive at that, and that I think has come through all my career.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned thirst for knowledge and competitiveness, because I found that you were the first to go to uni in your family. Right, so I was going to ask, where did that come from for you, this competitiveness, this thirst for knowledge and ideas? So take me to the family of the Napiers when you were 16. So I come into your house on Sunday. What do I see? Who is Mark at that point?
So I have 3 brothers and a sister.
Okay.
I'm the oldest. My mum and dad, my dad worked, very hard his whole life. Between driving for the council and doing taxis to get extra money, or doing lots of overtime, and so I lived in an environment where my dad worked really hard to provide for 4 kids. 5 kids, me and 4 others, and effectively spent a lot of time doing that. My mum was at home, so she took care of us and had to put up with the behaviour of like 5 kids growing up, until she also ended up later on in her life going and working full time. Once the older ones, my youngest brother's 14 years younger, so once the older ones were a little bit older, she went out and forged a career for herself and worked full time and done really well. So I've always been around like a family, making dinner, sitting down and having dinner, whether it was at a table, whether it was at on the couch, whatever it might be, that eating together, homemade cooking, not convenient food, so really everyone round about eating at the same time, being part of the same family, going on holidays to a caravan that we had, because I think we didn't go on I never went on a foreign holiday with my mum and dad. That wasn't something that was within our grasp at that point. It was something my siblings later got to enjoy,
Really?
which is great,
Okay.
and my mum and dad got to enjoy, which is even better. But going to a caravan, same caravan down there, going down to the beach, making fun and games, whether that's like, hunting in the forest for make-believe things, or whether that's finding golf balls in the golf course, or building sandcastles and going in the sea. That was it, and that was great. It was, you look back and you enjoy it, and you think that's a great upbringing and a great introduction. But also through that, you see you get a desire to go, like, your parents are working really hard for you, and they want to create that environment where their kids have that opportunity to do better, and do things they enjoy. And that kind of drove me from giving back, so to speak. I think, maybe it's just being competitive, maybe I was academic, but that desire to make something that felt like that commitment, that love, that support and care was kind of ended up with something that you could look at and say you achieved something. So that started, I suppose, with studying hard and making that a focus, because the focus was, how do you get to university? And, at that time, back in 1989, that was like, there were only a few universities, and, places were not. And there weren't as many opportunities as there are now, so you had to do really well. That was the place that only certain people got to go to, and so that was the kind of drive for me. School's a interesting environment. I don't look back and think I had a hard time, but I probably didn't have the easiest time. For kids that study hard, that's a focus for them. That can sometimes be challenging, but it wasn't the worst of times.
Right.
But once I'd finished 5th year and got my enough qualifications and good results to get into Strathclyde University, I was off, but stayed at home, commuted up and down. That was the only way that was going to be feasible, but, and that's a lot of sacrifices from your parents to create that opportunity. So I think the competitiveness also starts there, and that desire to get good qualifications and make that step that wasn't traditionally something that was kind of within the wider family at that point in time. I mean, it's great. My parents were very supportive, while, not necessarily saying, you should do this or you should do that. But they created a supportive environment in terms of we're going to do whatever it takes to make that a path that you can pursue. But also, my dad's history is very smart, great, very artistic, great drawer. Probably if the opportunities had been different, would certainly have been someone who went on, whether to like an art school or whether to academia, but that wasn't a path that was open to him. The path for him was one of a number of kids, and it was, how do you get out there and work and earn money and contribute? That was what you contributed to the family. So like back in, in the age of my dad, that was the necessity, was you went out and you worked and you kind of sacrificed other opportunities that maybe your teachers at school and people knew you were capable of, but that just wasn't going to be an option for you. So I think that's also an important thing to have parents who maybe have had the capability but not the opportunity. There's also a part of you thinks you have to go on and take that opportunity that they're creating for you.
Do you feel a certain pressure on you, or was it just more of like a balanced drive?
I think it was a balanced drive. I didn't feel pressure. It was my desire more than my parents feeling that was something I needed to do or set up. So I would say I was more supported in what I wanted to do, as opposed to feeling pressure in terms of doing that. Whatever pressure I felt was for my own to succeed and get the best grades I could and get to the best course I could, right? Because, I'd really fancied a course that it wasn't just about the grades. It was a small course. So it was actually an interview and you had to get selected because there was going to be lots of people who had the same level of grades. So there was also that kind of like, maybe that's my competition, competitive side coming out. She was like, I could go and do that course just with the grades, or I could go and do that one by having to go through an interview and get selected. And, so maybe I always choose the hard path. But I think that was the right thing for me to do. It was a great course to be on. But, my only how I would characterise it is I just felt supported in terms of what I wanted to do, and something that, my parents had not a lot of experience of it.
Right. How will 16-year-old Mark react to what you're doing, like where you are right now?
So I think despite, I think as a 16-year-old looking at where I am now, I would say, firstly, I don't think I would ever have imagined I would be doing what I'm doing today. I don't think I'd ever imagined that I would have been doing what I'm doing today from Glasgow, even within JP Morgan, right? So I think, to get to the point where I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the International Private Bank at JP Morgan, and I'm a guy who came from working class background in Ayrshire, and having had the privilege to lead this tech centre in addition, I don't think I would ever have expected that to be where I ended up, right? I would have thought it was maybe just like get a good job, have a good income, raise a family, not have to worry about things as much would have been my expectation and hope. I always wanted to lead people, so maybe there was an element of that in there as well. But I think I would be very surprised, age 16, if I went back to say you're going to end up doing this. But fantastic that I've been able to do that. Fantastic that I've been able to do that in an organisation like JP Morgan. There's part of me in that, and there's part of the company in that, in terms of what JP Morgan as an employer has offered to people in Glasgow, in our Glasgow office in particular. I'm sure that's true of a lot of employers, but it's a kind of double. There's always two parts to where multiple parts to where someone ends up.
Interesting, because I also understand that you had like the drive and the commitment to like succeed. But I'm also aware that life has this way of bringing people across your way that make an impact and give you the opportunities you need to like grow.
Yep.
Is there anybody who comes to mind who's made a huge impact on who you are as a person and shaped your trajectory with opportunities or mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think most people's path in life is shaped by a number of people, right? And I think it's challenging to call out individuals because I think there's many people who've contributed to it. Obviously, my parents were instrumental in the start of that journey, and in supporting me, as I progressed, right? I worked for a family business for a couple of years, as you probably know, you've heard that story, and so I suppose at that point I was close to two uncles who ran that business, and seeing some of that drive and determination to have something, build something of their own, and employ a number of people, create jobs and opportunities. I think I have to look back at that and say they were, part of my journey and part of informing my journey in terms of what I wanted to do. And obviously that was the touching point for me between getting into technology. So they were kind of instrumental. I think when I started at JP Morgan, I worked with a couple of contractors down in London. One of them, Sue Farrell, a female in technology back in 1997, was absolutely instrumental in supporting me and guiding me and even helping me to replace her job that she happily done in London for many years up in Glasgow. So you've got, Sue's maybe not like a leader in the traditional sense or a manager of people, but a leader in terms of the support that she provided me and being a role model and showing what can be achieved and really standing out from, a diverse perspective in an industry that wasn't that diverse at the time. So you kind of get a bit of shape of that there. And then I suppose people that I've worked for over the period of time, sometimes your growth is not just about who you want to, what you've learned from people to do. Sometimes it's what you've learned not to do. So it's hard to go into names, but like you work with people and you look at both sides of that. Like everybody, including me, I've got my, things I probably do well and people think that's good, and I probably get things that you think you'd not to do. So I think it's important when you look at leaders and who shapes you, you don't forget the shaping of maybe how you choose not to do things.
Gotcha.
Because I think that's sometimes when you see that and taking that on board and thinking that's as much a priority as how to do things.
Right.
So I've worked with a number of leaders over a period of time that have helped me in that regard.
Right. Okay. And in terms of your ambition and drive, I have just one last question there. So you're 16, you had this drive. I'm going to go to school, make the most of my education, make something out of my career and grow great. Yep. But life sometimes like throws lemons, and people sometimes like have very difficult, challenging periods. Tell me about a time when you had life throw lemons at you and you were down, but had to sort of walk yourself up through life and figure out who you are and find yourself on your feet again.
I think, so obviously I went through university, I had a great time, thoroughly enjoyed my 5 years, was coming out into the big wide world of job hunting, had met my first girlfriend at the time, had been going out, and kind of suddenly this idea that you're going to gravitate to London or some other, far-flung place, became a bit of a, is that really what I want to do? So you're in a relationship, you're getting to the point where you're applying for jobs, and kind of you start to think, actually, what's more local? And I suppose at that point in time, my uncles were growing their business. I'd actually worked in there for the last summer before I graduated, helping them out. And they offered me the opportunity to come on board. And I suppose I kind of took that opportunity because it meant I stayed local, right? It meant I stayed where I was. I didn't need to think about moving away. And, I didn't need to think about the impact on a relationship and that sort of thing. So I suppose I took that opportunity. 2 years later, I've been working with family, I've been working really hard, and it's challenging working with family. That throws a bit of a curveball, and you kind of suddenly realize, like, where's this going to go? Are you going to be, are you going to end up being a partner in a business? Is it what you want to do? Does the dynamic work for you? Is this the last opportunity you've got to rethink who you are? And I think that was probably the curveball, just in terms of sometimes relationships in companies like that become challenging. It's great to work with family until it's not great to work with family. And it's not one thing, but it's just, that probably was the curveball of, where do I go from here, right? I'm kind of in a bakery, I'm managing it, I'm getting some support from uncles, they're doing certain things, there's a silent partner in the business, you're working 364 days a year, 24 hours a day, you're kind of in and out and dealing with, catastrophes along the way, and you're just kind of like, and as much as you can put into it, you think, where's the actual end goal of this? And that was probably the curveball. It's not a desperate curveball, but that was the curveball in terms of, actually, like, I want to get into technology.
Yeah.
This isn't my future. Like, technology is the future. Okay. And that came from just simple observation, working in that small family business that was, automating accounts or payroll or, breaking into a vendor system accidentally and finding out how to make some changes to it. And then realizing that technology was super critical to that small business, right? If that business went out, we delivered wholesale to shops. Yeah. And even back then, 96, 97, if drivers go out to shops and say, how much do you want? How many dozen rolls do you want? How many loaves of bread do you want? How many cakes do you want? Shopkeepers are like, well, what do you normally get? So you see the power of data. Yeah. What do you normally get? Oh, on a Tuesday you get this. Okay, let's go for that. Oh, it's a Saturday. Most people aren't working. You sell 3 times as many rolls. So that power of that data, if you don't have that data, 2 things happen. Either you don't give clients enough produce and they're calling you at 10 o'clock in the morning saying you need to send more out and you've got cost and expense. Yeah. Or you're going to a shop the next day and they're saying, take all this produce back because you gave me too much and I'm not paying for it. So you lose money either way. So back then I realized, wow, if this technology doesn't fire up each day and do this, like, this business loses money. And that was the turning point of me saying, actually, I want to get into technology. And so I made the decision to go back to university, do a postgrad in technology. Then, of course, yes, the world was like your JP Morgans, your Accentures, your Logica consultant, you're London-based. And obviously at that point in time, then you're talking about moving away and you're dealing with the challenges of, relationships and moving away, and you're making that kind of big life decision of where do you go. And that's when I landed at JP Morgan. Right. In technology.
Yeah, so on leadership, because I think I remember in 2020, just before COVID hit, you became the lead of the Glasgow Technology Centre. And that was a huge pivotal moment in the world. Yep. I can't imagine the immense pressure you must have felt at that time. So you're getting this new role. What's going through your mind and what lessons have you learned about leadership from your career since then?
So I get the role, I get asked to take on the role, I kind of formally take on the role, what turned out to be 2 weeks before we kind of go into lockdown for COVID. So at this point I'm thinking, what are the things about taking on this role that I want to drive change for in JP Morgan Glasgow? Right? And, how do we want to, change the culture? How do we want to be maybe more transparent in certain things, decisions, bring the leadership of the site closer to all of the people in the site, and have a, continue to drive our culture of respect and inclusion, right? Continue to drive what are the right behaviours and expectations we have of people to create to continue to create a more inclusive environment. That's going through my head. How do we do that? How do we reorganize the leadership team? And suddenly it's like COVID hits, everybody's worried, people are questioning why they're still coming to an office, and I'm kind of thrust into discussions with, senior leadership in JP Morgan UK about what do we do, right? And I think that kind of, I was very clear in my understanding of where I thought we were from a site perspective, and I was very focused on what was right for the site, for Glasgow, for all of our staff, and then how did that fit into the bigger UK picture. So it's quite interesting, that dynamic between, a UK-wide top-down approach and then a site bottom-up approach, and I think the balance is always trying to get those two things right. So 2 weeks in, I'm having discussions about, I think the right time is the time to ask people to work from home, to be a leader, to take that bold decision and support the staff in that as a decision that we're supporting making, as opposed to an individual's feeling they have to make that decision themselves. So it was a very fine balance at that point in time. So, and then I'm trying to suddenly work out how long do we think this is going to go on for, and what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of the identity of the site and the people in it? And I think I was very clear early on and with people that it could have turned out completely differently, better or worse, but I was pretty clear that it was likely that we were not going to be back in an office environment for at least a year, right? Because these things, it was, even though we hadn't experienced it before, everything was kind of pointing to the fact that we'd be out for a long time. So then it was about communication to staff and how do you keep people involved, communicated to help them still feel part of a site. So the importance suddenly goes to our town halls, our communication, our use of Zoom suddenly comes to the fore. And how do you still try to create a culture and change things? And, now that you're not physically here, because suddenly physical's all we've known, right? So we think we change things by physically being there and enacting that change. And suddenly you're thinking, we still need to make these changes, but we're now in this virtual world. And how do we take care of the people who, in that virtual world, are struggling a little bit more? How do we create that supportive environment for that? How do we keep in contact without being overbearing? How do we allow people to voice their concerns in a transparent manner? And you know that we've always had a, since I've looked after the site, we've always had a very open communication, transparent. People can ask anything they want. It might not always come across the best in terms of some of that, because, we're all individuals at the end of the day. But, I think in a way, it's great that people have been able to ask questions or make comments that perhaps when I started many years ago, they're not things that you would have felt comfortable talking about. So I think we did manage to continue to drive the culture forward, to continue to be more inclusive. We did, I think, address, more transparency, but it was very challenging to do that in that remote environment. Obviously, at the same time, we've got this fantastic building that we're in here today that's in the planning stages. That's, the old buildings that are here are getting knocked down. The world's questioning whether we need offices again. You're in a dynamic of how do we keep this wonderful thing going for all the people in JP Morgan Glasgow.
Hello there. Sorry to interrupt your video. Just wanted to say, if you haven't subscribed and you enjoyed our videos, please do subscribe and hit the like button and comment as well. That would help our channel get recommended to people like you, amazing, cool superstars like you, who enjoy content like this. Anyways, back to the episode.
How do we not lose this prize that we had won in terms of getting this significant investment for everyone here to create a fantastic work environment and keep that on the straight and narrow and keep that executing while all of these unknowns are going around. So a lot of effort involved in working with our colleagues in real estate on that at the time. And then getting involved in, what might that look? How does it change? How does what we're experiencing and what we think we're going to go to in the future change what we were going to do with this office? And that was a lot of work in terms of this office was really about creating more seats to be able to bring in more people. And suddenly that future world of hybrid working said, actually, seats are not the most important thing here, and the space, the amenities, the experience, the ability to collaborate, the kind of experience of coming into your work, and for us, having great facilities to shower in, and we've got a very active community in cycling, running, bike racks, thinking about what's important to the people, our staff was, looking at the environment as well, and then saying, well, okay, let's give up car parking spaces, let's put in more space for bikes, and thinking about that. How do you live your life, and how does the office, how does the days that you will come to the office fit into that?
Yeah.
And make that an experience that people want to participate in, right? So if you're going to be, if we talk about collaboration, then where are the collaboration spaces?
Yeah.
Right? And are these spaces that teams can walk into? Are these spaces that need to be regimented and booked in advance and feels more constrained? So we gave over a lot of desk space, created more collaboration space, put a lot more thought into the well-being of staff, and I think created a facility that, people are coming in more than they need to come in. And I think that's a good reflection of what we've created. But, obviously I had the hardship of, telling people that, we needed people to come back into the office. So I suppose I had the experience of telling people what they wanted to hear. They can work from home. And then 2 years later, I had the experience of telling people what they didn't want to hear. But, I think we communicated well on that, and, I think that was key, really, communication, irrespective of how, the fact that we knew there was going to be a lot of feedback and a lot of negativity around that. But change is challenging, right?
Always.
By that time, people had been working from home for, almost 18 months.
Yeah.
Change is very challenging to drive. So, but I think sharing why, there are other reasons we can, collaboration, I think is important, so does our senior leaders. I think that our ability to deliver in business solutions is made better by the time that we interact. But I think the things for us that when we think about our contribution to the community, which is hugely important for us here in Glasgow, like what we contribute as people to the local community by being in the office, it shouldn't be underestimated, right?
True.
It's not just about having well-paid jobs and all of us being comfortable in our communities and that. Like, we were a big contributor to a lot of small, medium-sized businesses in Glasgow city centre, right? We were a contributor to the community as a whole in that regard. And they lost, those businesses, a lot of businesses went out of business. The footfall has went down considerably. I remember talking at some of the Glasgow City Council meetings that you're going to need like almost twice as many jobs to create the same footfall for those businesses in the city centre that lived off of people spending their day working in the city. So I think our highlighting that, that contribution that we make is important. And then highlighting the contribution you make to young people making their journey and their career, like I was many, many years ago, or people moving to join your company that don't have a network of people. Like, we can often think about ourselves. What does this mean for me? I'm good. I've been in this team for 5 years. I know everyone I need to know. I don't really need to be interacting face to face. But what we forget is we're not just here for us. We're here for other people. We're here for everyone else. And sometimes it's not about what we need. It's about what the people around about us need from us. So I think that's a key thing for us, and that was my kind of, guiding remit in terms of how I talk to people about coming back to the office. But fast forward a few years, and I think we've ended up in a great place for everyone. And I think, hard though it was, and a tragedy that COVID was, we're in a place that we would never have been, if you can think back to that, for everyone that works here. Everyone that works generally. We're in a very different place in terms of that flexibility that we offer now.
Yeah, as we start to wrap up this episode, I asked a couple of random colleagues to describe Mark Napier in 3 words, right? And I'll go first.
Okay.
Okay. So
these are your words.
These are my words,
Okay.
right? When I think about you, one of the first words that come to mind is approachable. And I think it sort of fits into what you say when you're talking about transparency and creating this open communication. Because I still remember when I was in your office last year or 2 years ago, talking about representation and recruitment, and I was honestly blown away that my boss's boss, would have his doors open to me as well. And when I think about you as well, something that comes to mind is a strong leader, someone who has a vision for how he thinks, we can come together to grow, and you deliver on that. And then also, when I think of you, I think of someone who's driven, has a strong work ethic. I don't see you as someone who's just, lays around and then just let things go. I'm going to read some of the other words that folks gave, but before we do that, I thought we could do a quick reflective round and then we'll wrap up.
By the way, you shouldn't underestimate the role that you played in that conversation and that, being willing to approach.
Thank you.
And have that discussion, and really, we've talked about this before, but opened my eyes to something that I maybe thought wasn't going to be the thing that I spent a lot of time focusing on, or that we should, and in the grand scheme of everything that we need to focus on. So you definitely opened my eyes to say, actually, you can achieve more than you think. And you can achieve more if we go in the right direction and we support people like yourself in terms of the passion and drive that's there.
Yeah.
So, credit to you.
Thank you.
You might call me driven, you're driven, and you're willing to approach people. And sometimes people are shaped by, as we said, the people around about them. So
thank you very much.
Don't underestimate
That's very encouraging.
Your drive there. Yeah.
That's it. Okay, so reflective phase, a couple of questions and we're done with this. If you could talk to 18-year-old Mark, so 18-year-old Mark is right here seated, facing you, and you could tell him anything. It could be an advice, a quote, a song. What would you tell him?
So firstly, around about 18 was probably at the time that I was sleeping in more for university. So I'd say, do you know what? Just get your backside up to university, right? So you don't get these experiences a lot. So spend more time there. I suppose it's kind of funny looking all the way back to 18, but I would probably say, even though I was confident, I would probably say, be more confident in your abilities. I think at that point in time, there's still a challenge. I'm from Ayrshire, I'm from Scotland. It might be hard to imagine I might have had red hair at some point in time, but it's hard to feel that you belong somewhere in terms of, big organisations, potentially senior jobs in the city. So I think it would just be, maybe if I had my time round again, maybe I would have taken those opportunities the first time.
As opposed to join the family business?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe that would have been, now maybe my path would have been different. But I have a friend that I was at university with, the same course, who actually joined JP Morgan straight from university. So I might have a different perspective in terms of saying, look, be more confident to make that jump and say you belong and you've earned your opportunity to go and interview with these organisations. And if you end up in London, because obviously that was the big city at that point in time, and then do that. So I suppose that's one thing. I think for much later on in life, it would be just, be careful you think more about the other people that you're working with, and think about the impact that you have on them and how you do things, not just the what.
Wow.
Okay, so I think, I kind of probably, I think, was more focused on the what we're doing, what's the outcome, what have we delivered.
Wow.
So I would say back, and I think all of that comes from even when you're younger, is like, just spend a little bit more time thinking about the how. How do we achieve that, and what does that mean for the people around about you? Because I probably got feedback at various points in my career around the what was really successful, and the how had some rough edges. Maybe the road that you look back on was not as pretty as it could have been. And I associated that how with the what more than I should have. You know, and I think it's an interesting one when you get feedback around these are really good. And is that sometimes you associate, well, but that's the what we've achieved is because of the how. And so it probably took me more years than it should have to recognise that there was different hows to achieve the same what, the same outcomes, different paths. So I would say back then, like I would tell myself then, learn that quickly. Don't spend too long learning it. Yeah.
Okay. And on the concept of like growing in confidence, how would you have increased your confidence? Like, how do you think you could have? Then is it just taking leaps, or what would that process have been like?
Yeah, I think there's always a little bit of self-doubt. You know, succeeding in academic studies is not necessarily the same as being successful in a work environment, right? So as much as you can feel confident about that, and obviously you can study hard and get good results, feel confident, I think it's hard to get confidence of how you would fit into something that's not first, second nature to you, right? An environment, a place, a type of company. So I think it's very hard to get that experience and confidence other than actually just taking the leap and doing it, right? And being there is whether I would call it that. There's probably a genuine, part of being afraid of how that might turn out and how it might work. And I do find that as you continue on in your career, you find that those leaps into areas you're less familiar with or unknown or they're never as bad as they're never as bad. They just aren't, and I spend a lot of time you deal with kids growing up and all that, like things are never as bad, so I think every step I've taken, whether that's moving from one line of business to another, whether that's being promoted and then moving into an area at that level, being perceived as how do you compare to other people that are there, it's never been as bad as I've expected it. I think it is maybe remarkable how quickly you as an individual can impress people and do good things, if you focus on it and kind of be accepted and supported. There's always people there to support you. I go back to, back in the days when I started at JP Morgan, there was a lot of contract people who worked in technology. That was the majority. And yet you get support from those people who essentially you're on a journey to replace their job. So it's what some people will do to help you is absolutely remarkable. So I suppose maybe that's the thing that we should tell people is like, be comfortable that there will always be people there to help you to make that leap. Gotcha. Right? There will be someone on the other side who will catch you.
Have the faith.
Help you. Yeah.
Right. And I tend to flip the 18-year-old question and say, imagine if 80-year-old Mark was listening to this conversation in a couple of decades, what would you want him to hear? So 80-year-old is listening to this, looking back at the future, like, okay, what is something you would want him to hear from the previous?
80-year-old or 18-year-old?
80.
80?
Yes.
What would I love if someone, when I was 80, to look back and hear? I think I would just want them to go, look, it's great that you recognise the role that you play in bringing lots of people, forward and supporting them and, and providing opportunities. I've provided opportunities for people and supported them in their passions, and hopefully left an environment that people will continue to grow and do the things that they want to do and enjoy it, and inclusive and diverse environment. And that I'll look back and say, you did the right thing, even if the right thing was hard at the time, right? So I would want to look back and go, you continued. It's great that you continued to be true to yourself, even if being true to yourself might have caused you some jeopardy along the way. Yeah, because I think that is always a challenge, right? To be true to yourself, and for most people, there'll be times in your career or your life where being true to yourself is going to make things more challenging for you. And so I'd want to look back and go, well done, you took the harder path.
Love it. You took the harder path. Final two questions. This next question is a question we ask all our guests on research. Is the one question you're going to find. And it is, given your life's experiences, your journey, your ups and downs, if your life was a book, what would its title be?
What would its title be? That's very interesting. Never had that question before. So.
Thank you.
I think it would be Succeeding in Balance or something like that.
Succeeding in Balance.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that title?
Because I've always viewed success, and the competition plays into that, as the end goal. And as I've progressed, I've realised that there's other things that you need to balance with that. So maybe a successful balance, or balancing success, or something like that. I mean, that sounds like that. There's probably elements of that you go, really, you're going to call a book success? But I suppose it's that blend of, you can drive to be successful, whatever that is for you, whether that's career, whether that's family, whether that's supporting people, building a business, growing your knowledge, having impact, whatever that is. But I think to do it right and do it well and be, happy with yourself, I think you need to have a balance in terms of how you come by that success. Right. So I suppose it goes back to the what and the how, and maybe the how's the balance and the what's the
goal.
So
balancing success.
Yes.
Well, Mark, if you ever,
I'd love to write a book on golf, but that's way above my station just now. But
if you ever release an autobiographical balancing success, people will know where they heard it from. It's on this podcast. Okay. And the last question is a hot take. So this is Mark's hot take on certain topical issues in society.
Okay.
Hot take. So one, you're the leader of the Glasgow site lead of JP Morgan, over 2,600 employees. How do you think we can tell or rewrite the narrative of Scotland as being a hotbed of technology and innovation? Because historically, the popular story has just been the cold place, with haggis and tradition and all these things. But Scotland is actually known for a lot of innovations.
Yeah.
I'm told the X-ray telephone and there were a number of inventions from Scotland.
Yes.
So how do you think we can, whether as JP Morgan, as individuals, as the government of Scotland, position Scotland's narrative as, we've got technology here, we're actually very investable and stuff?
Yep. Well, so I think you have to work with the government, to create a better narrative.
Okay.
Around the successful cases that we've got in Scotland, the successful growth stories, and continue that narrative from the history, as you said, right? We don't make enough about that. Glasgow, is the same, for some work to do with the council. It's we're trying to craft the Glasgow narrative. What is the history of Glasgow? what does it mean? What kind of talent do we have? We are innovative. The people in Glasgow are, make Glasgow is the slogan, and how do we tell that story? And then how do we provide the current showcase? So I think it's about providing platforms for that showcasing of the talent, the businesses, the ideas. And we obviously do that in a microcosm within JP Morgan, right? So we do that today. You look at our peer-to-peer learning communities, Ignite.
Yeah.
That's a brand that was born here in Glasgow and taken to across the whole of JP Morgan. So kudos to the people here, but it's about continuing to repeat those things. We get the charity, make it happen, going into schools, building mobile apps, creating innovation and ideas amongst kids. So it's not all about what we do within the four walls. It's about external community. It's about giving a voice and a platform to those things and not being afraid to repeat them. Because in life, as I've kind of grown through things, you realize that you wonder sometimes why leaders repeat things. And then eventually you realize that actually you have to repeat things, right? That is how eventually things get absorbed. You might not think that you need to do it, but it's actually just a thing that you need to do. So I think repeating the successes is absolutely something that we want to do. And I think you'll see, our changing dynamic of being more to the fore in terms of industry awards.
Yeah.
And putting individuals forward and putting teams forward and putting solutions forward is part of that narrative, right? It is about taking advantage of those opportunities to put, whether it's JP Morgan, whether it's our individuals, whether it's Scotland, on a higher footing in terms of that. And that's what other people do well. I've always said, one of the things that I always need on my teams is someone who does the marketing better than I do.
That's crucial.
Because I don't do the marketing well, right? But it's super important in terms of, to your point, that recognition, right? For teams, for people, for countries, for capabilities. So I just think we need to do more of that. We need to be more proud and prepared to blow our own trumpet, which is not always the Scottish way of doing things.
Why is that?
I think just a culture over time. We work hard, we do good things, but we don't.
Right.
Well, we don't blow your own trumpet about it. Yeah, we're not as rah-rah about it. So yeah, I think that's culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? That's just part of culture, and then you have to. Clearly, in the past, it didn't stop, Scotland from, being involved in great things and, innovating and generating ideas that have transformed, the world. Right? So it's just about, keep that up, recognizing your culture, and then maybe saying, how do I mitigate against that? How do I put myself forward, my team forward for awards, even though I don't naturally feel that? So it's about putting yourself outside your comfort. Yeah. So culturally, Scotland needs to be willing to put itself outside its comfort zone. And some of our leadership are doing that. We've got very big aspirations in terms of climate, and goals that we want to achieve. So I think we're starting to do a little bit of that. Set your goals high.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm thinking storytelling is a huge part, and I've been having this idea in my head. Maybe keep in check on what you think. Sometime in the future, I'm thinking of starting a podcast called I Innovate, AYE, celebrating Scottish innovations. But then another version is Scotland does that, infusing Scottish humor into our innovations, because I think the storytelling component is key. Final hot take from Mark before we wrap up. Now, artificial intelligence has been huge for the last couple of years.
Yep.
But I saw a meme today, actually, about a train with few people, and it says, investors are rushing to cryptocurrency right now. What do you think about artificial intelligence? Is that a fad, or is that here to stay?
So I do think it's here to stay. It's a broad term, obviously, in terms of everything that it encompasses. So I do think it's here to stay. I mean, machine learning is probably still the thing that offers most advantage to big companies, to finance companies. We're probably not leveraging even those capabilities as well as we should. And then on top of that, you look at ChatGPT, large language models. I think these capabilities, and they're not an end state, and maybe, a lot of people would say they're also not the building blocks for the next generation of artificial intelligence, but they are clearly enablers, and we need to learn how to use them in any walk of life, whether that's your kids, your children, using it to augment their study, right? Whether that's at university using it, whether that's in a job using it, whether that's for preparing for your next job and opportunity and continuing your learning. I definitely think this idea more of learning to use these tools, especially LMs, as a co-pilot capability to augment your capabilities.
Yeah,
I think is huge, right? There's a lot of studies about, a lot of jobs that these tools will make average better.
Yeah.
They might not make the best better to the same extent, but there are definitely going to be opportunities for people who learn how to use these capabilities better than other people.
Yeah.
And I do think they will be, the world's been looking for what's the next thing that propels us on.
Yeah.
Right? What's the next phase of, like, whether it's industrialization, whether it's digitalization, what's the next thing that's going to make us advance to the next level? And certainly right now, these would seem like the opportunities. I think it's fascinating, the ability to interpret information, data that us as humans would never be able to consume and link together that amount of information. So I think the ability, and hopefully when you think about health and well-being, I think there's tremendous positives for this kind of technology. You're already seeing it.
Yes. Definitely.
You already see it in terms of, X-ray scans, the ability for AI to identify, whether it's tumours, cancer, to a much higher level than a human potentially now can. There might always be a human in the loop, but you're starting to see real value and potential that are either about, society as a whole, or health, well-being, and that can only be a good thing, I think. So I think it's here to stay.
Yeah.
It's like everything else. The caveat is it's not a silver bullet for everything. We know that in technology from many things that have been silver bullets. So we're maybe a little bit over excited in some respects with it just now, but that's generally how these things work. We'll be a little bit overexcited, and we'll maybe use it in some places that it may do something well, but it's probably not the tool that was actually really needed.
Yeah.
But we have to learn, right?
Yeah.
So, and I love that. I was reading a book recently about some university professors who are actively encouraging their students to leverage AI, large language models, as part of how they think about things, their ideas, produce their coursework, respond to initiatives. And I think that's probably where we need to be.
Gotcha.
As opposed to are we worried about just using AI to do your homework and cheating? I mean, I think we will need to move on from that. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you're a technologist like me. Most technologists still use Google to check out how things work. So it's not really, what do you want? Do you, you've maybe heard me say this before, I think you need to be able to learn for your entire career. And I think people who can learn better than others will do better than others. Yeah. And therefore, anything you can use to learn and understand things more quickly are tools that you should absolutely be leveraging. But I do hope that we get a bigger societal good out of it. Right. So I'm certainly more embrace it rather than be super worried about what it might do.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that concludes my questions. I promised I was going to read the words people describe you as. Are you ready? So I have that on my phone, actually. So here are just a couple of words that if you folks described you as today, they shall remain nameless. Are you ready?
Yes, embraced, yes.
Visionary,
Visionary, okay.
strategic,
Uh-huh.
collaborative, empathetic, extrovert, enthusiastic, invested, knowledgeable, harsh but fair,
I like that one.
honest, transparent, approachable. And I asked someone who just finished on the apprenticeship program, and these were 3 words that the person used: compassionate, supportive, and empathetic. How does that make you feel?
I am very pleased, super proud. So in answer to some of your other questions, if I looked back or looked forward and said, will those be words that are used to describe me, that would make me super happy. So, there's a lot of people words in there, right?
Yeah.
Not doing words. There are some doings, but there's a lot of people words in there on the balance side.
Yeah.
That makes me really happy. And whoever said harsh but fair, that is a pretty high bar for me, fairness. It sometimes gets me into trouble. You know, when I kind of advocate for something I think might not be fair. And therefore, it's important to me that people view me as fair.
Yeah.
Right? And I may be a bit harsh, but like, you know, fair is a good baseline. But those other words are fantastic to hear from people on that website. So thank you for bringing them to me. Thank you for spending the time to go and speak to people.
Thank you very
and
much.
ask them for that. I really appreciate it.
You're a leader I admire really deeply, and I'm really grateful. Even this opportunity, thanks for coming on. I mean, if you could tell our listeners any final thing, what would that be? Anything on your mind at all?
So all I would say is, like, I thoroughly enjoyed the time that was spent here, but like, you know, you're amazing.
Thank you.
Right? And, you know, anyone would be proud to have you as a role model, family, friend, and you've done some fantastic stuff. So, like, I would really want to thank you for giving me the time, spending your time with me, to share that, right, and have me think a bit more about things. So, yes. So,
thank you very much.
Very special man, Sam. That's what I want to tell people.
I really appreciate it.
Hello there. Thank you for watching our videos and episodes so far. I've realized, and this is quite heartbreaking, some of you watch, but you don't subscribe. What a shame. You should subscribe.